I hope he's listening somewhere, that he'll be able to take back our greetings. And he really is a very great poet, and it is a great shame that he's not here as well. But we have a poet here too, so it's great. And just very quickly, I'll whiz through the details, and you can tell us the interesting stuff. But Marcelius Martinaitis was born in 1936 in the west of Lithuania, so he wasn't a city boy, but out in the Lithuanian wild sort of village.
Yes.
He was from a village,
Very
wasn't he?
rural, isolated area.
And so, by comparison with our city poet here. And just before the Second World War, so you can imagine what that means. So war and communism, and then today, of course, post-Soviet rule have accompanied him and fired his writing for, well, his whole life. He's a winner of several major awards in Lithuania. He really is a grand old man of Lithuanian literature. He studied at Vilnius University, which is where Laima also studied. He worked as a journalist and as an editor for 10 years. He taught at Vilnius University until he retired, so nearly two, 3 decades. He's also famous in Lithuania as a political and social activist, and that is quite an unusual story in Lithuania by comparison with other East European countries. We might talk a bit about that. In his very long career, Martinaitis has published 15 collections of poetry, 5 collections of essays, and an autobiography. And all of it's very widely translated, except into English. We've got 2 collections of poetry in English, thanks to you. We need more. Now, you are American-born Lithuanian,
Yes.
but you live in Lithuania. Now, I'm going to ask you to tell us about your connections with Martinaitis and how you became, how you got to know him and got to know his poetry as well. I'll let you hold this.
Okay, thank you.
So keep it quite close to your mouth.
Yes. Okay. Well, the book that I have today, The Ballads of Kukutis, I actually first translated this book during the years 1988, 1989, when I traveled to then Soviet Lithuania to study Lithuanian literature and translation at Vilnius University. It was a very interesting time. I'm American-born. My mother is American-born. My grandfather and grandmother came to New York City in 1936. My grandfather was a young diplomat at the time. War came on. He remained as part of the government, Lithuania's government, in exile. And so through my grandfather, I always had, he was a real fighter. He was a dissident, very wise man. And he really taught me to be curious about everything, about the world, about life, and to take risks. And so, inspired by my grandfather's life, I applied for a visa to study Lithuanian literature and translation at Vilnius University, because at that time I was reading the work of some very exciting Lithuanian poets, among them Marcelius Martinaitis. And this book of persona poems is very unique in that, in fact, just before I came to England, just on this weekend, I was sitting at I went to visit Marcelius Martinaitis, see after his health, and I was sitting with a few friends and him and his wife, and we were talking about this book and how I would speak to all of you today. And he just kept shaking his head, and he said, I just can't imagine how that book got past the censors in 1977. And his wife said, yeah, we were always waiting for the knock at the door.
It is extraordinary when you read the book. You think, how on earth did some of that get past the censors?
Yeah, so that was it.
They were, I know that censors were actually quite thick, but sometimes.
Well, yeah, we were sitting in, and he lives in his dacha, his garden house, and we were eating apple cake that he prepared himself and discussing that very question just on Sunday. And part of it is that all literature that was written in the Soviet Union had to be given to a committee called Gladlit to be checked to see if there was anything at all political or political in nature. And But before the literature was even handed over to this committee, the editor of the publishing house would really go through the book with a fine-tooth comb. In the case of these poems, which for most Lithuanians, and I think not just for Lithuanians, they're blatantly political. They're blatantly not just anti-Soviet, but anti any dictatorship. I mean, we could apply this to what we see going on in the Middle East today, same sentiments. And how did it get past the censors? Well, for one thing, as you mentioned when reading Martinaitis' biography, that he comes from Western Lithuania, rural, isolated area that has its own very specific dialect, and the intonations of that dialect are in the poetry. So he thinks that because of this, because he was writing from his dialect, that could be a reason why the censors, fell asleep on the job and didn't catch the political overtones. But the other thing was that the censors read the book as nonsense poetry, as absurdist poetry, which it is on one level, but on another level it makes complete sense.
Kukutis, to explain who he is, I mean, he's a forest fool. He's
well, you could compare him to the trickster in the Native American literary tradition. Kukutis basically, Martinaitis explained it to me, that he had a very unfortunate childhood, that he was a small child during World War II, and the front, the German and Russian front, was pretty much fought in his backyard. So he grew up in his memoir that was published last year, We Lived. For the first time, he's able to talk about the atrocities that he witnessed as a child. And he, for example, he talks about how his parents were simple, uneducated farmers, and he was coming back with his father in a horse-drawn cart after having sold vegetables in the market square, and a German soldier tells him stop, and he sees as the German soldiers bring in the Jewish people of his region and how they're executed in a mass burial pit. And he, as a small child, witnessed this horrific event, and also saw a lot of fighting, spent a lot of his childhood hiding in the forest, avoiding deportation. He, for many years, had no knowledge of his family background because they had to burn all letters, family records, baptismal records, photographs. They had to completely wipe out their family's tradition in order not to be arrested and deported to Siberia. So he really came through a very, very difficult childhood, and he was talking about how in his village there were people who kind of slept-walked through these atrocities because they either feigned insanity or they really did lose their minds. That they formed their own separate society, that they were like these vagrants or vagabonds. They were harmless, they didn't hurt anybody, but they basically just dropped out of society. And they would talk about the visions that they had and how in their mind they could cross through all the borders. And he said as a child he would sit and listen to these people talk, and the villagers called them kukutises. Like they were just neither here nor there. They were not a part of society. In his later book of persona poems, which really he creates the persona of the post-Soviet man, his character KB ponders a lot about about homeless people who live from digging rubbish and food out of trash containers, and he makes that connection that always in society there's a caste of people that somehow fall between the cracks and no longer function.
But then they're the ones who tell the truth as well.
Exactly.
So
right.
you've got it's almost Shakespearean in the sense that you've got a Falstaff type character, if you like, the fool.
Right.
Or
It's
the
a Shakespearean fool.
Shakespeare.
Exactly.
I mean, we're going to sort of ask you, if I may just take that,
sure.
ask you to read from this, but just to, I mean, this is something that Lithuanians I think know very well. This book, and it's recited and known in schools and so on too. And and also it sounds as though it was written hundreds of years ago. In a way, it has that very traditional,
archaic
language, and wonderful to read. And the great thing about art publication, they actually publish these books in 2 languages too. So if you want to brush up your Lithuanian, you've got the 2 languages here.
Yeah.
Now you're going to read from sort of dotted through the book, is that right?
Yes, actually, I'd like to read a few of the poems, and really the way you have to listen to the poems, that they're always operating on 2 levels. The main character, Kukutis, like I said, he's a Stalin-era farmer, and he lives outside of the constraints of society, but at the same time, the local communist government is always trying to get him to follow the rules, and so the poems are quite absurdist.
Some are quite funny too.
They're very funny, yeah.
So, Laima, if you'd like to read, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
So I'll start with a little poem that appears right at the end of the book. And I think it's really quite indicative of communism. It's called Kukutis's Appeal to the Alphabet. All letters are equal, starting with A. A blocks our way. Exile A to the end. Let Z be written the same time as all the other letters. It's against the law to write A in front of Z, and it's against the law for Z to be written in front of A. All letters have equal rights. All letters have equal chances of getting into the same word. All letters must be written and pronounced at the same time. All capital letters must be abolished. All lowercase letters are to become uppercase. Here, I wanted to read a poem that really was a challenge to translate. And when you hear it, you'll know why. And it's one that Martinaitis and I always enjoy reading together in Lithuanian and English, just because of the rhythms of the poem. It's called An Experiment. What didn't he do so that he would be what he already was without trying to be what he already was? What didn't he try? He sang in a choir, bought several ties, shoe polish, a full-length mirror, joined the Wildlife Society. All in vain, he thought. After all, it's impossible to become what you already are. When you try to be what you already are, then you are not already what you already are. What didn't he try so that he might become what he already was, so that he would already be what he already wasn't? And he thought, Lord, what if someone saw me? How embarrassing, he thought. Well, it's not too late, I must run. And he broke into a run, knowing that he wasn't running by himself in the way he would run for himself, in the way he would run without trying to run, as if he were running without trying, as one really runs. However much he tried not to try, it was still trying to try not to try. How ridiculous, he thought. How ridiculous the whole thing is. It would seem that someone is trying to mislead me, so I become even more confused. But it's impossible to run so that you don't run, and still you must run so that it doesn't look as if running, you're trying not to run, because it just may be that a higher force is watching you. If you were to stop, he thought, then again, you wouldn't be stopping by yourself, wanting to be what you already are not running, and therefore you must run to run away somehow from this silly running. And he runs, with feathers from his pillow clinging to him, with eyes that don't see. He runs to be first and is chased by the bodiless forces of several worlds. Okay. So just a few more of the absurdist poems. The story I came up with to cheer up hanged Kukutis. In a wheelbarrow on feathers, they push the fool's king, so that he may look around him and see if the kingdom is big. Along the way, lined up, they ring bells for him, thanking him that they may thank him by ringing bells. He rides around the earth 10, 20 times and cannot find where the kingdom ends. And everywhere they consent to their own consent by singing and ringing bells. How many times, the king asks, does the kingdom
go around the earth? As many times, they answer, as there are times around the earth. And the king is amazed at how the same ones keep thanking the king for what they have done for themselves. They thank him that they may thank him by ringing bells. Only a few hanged ones chase after the wheelbarrow, asking that they be granted the permission to die. No, the king shakes his head. The rules of the kingdom are that it is forbidden for the hanged to die. And the king rides along in his wheelbarrow and is followed by one fool or another, and all of them are the same king. Okay. We have trolley buses. You have trams here in Manchester, and we have trolley buses in Vilnius. These days, almost everybody drives around in cars, but back in the Soviet times, people were always jostling for positions on the trolley bus. And so every once in a while, Kukutis takes a trip out of his village, which is called Žuveliškės, which means the village of little fish, and he goes to Vilnius. And every time he gets to Vilnius, he's really confused by contemporary life. So this poem is called Kukutis Rides a Full Trolley Bus. Packed in from all sides, Kukutis thinks happily to himself, what a pleasant thing it is to ride a trolley bus. You ride along and no one cares why you are riding. No one asks if you've said too much or if you've hurt someone. No one cares that you deceived someone or that from now on you've promised yourself to be truthful and honest to everyone you meet. No one looks to see how old you are, what color your eyes are, what color your hair is, if you have scars, who your relatives are, where you come from, and what you're doing here, and all in all, if you're alive or just riding around for the fun of it. They can't all turn around at once and ask, searchingly gaze into your eyes or notice the scars on your face. How comfortable it is. No one will notice if one day you didn't ride the trolley bus at all. And no one will come running to your home demanding to know, why weren't you riding the trolley bus? Do I have time? Okay. All right. Kukutis' sinful spirit. Well, Kukutis is Catholic, of course, as most Lithuanians are, so we have some Catholic themes here. When Kukutis falls asleep, his soul escapes out of his body through his eyes. Invisible to everyone, his soul roams around Žuveliškės, and no one can figure out who is it that is doing that which is against the law, the regulations, the 10 Commandments. Kukutis tosses and turns in his sleep and groans, who is it bringing unto him all these mortal sins? And how do so many of them find their way into his dreams? Mornings he cannot look women and children in the eyes. Oh, and his life had been so pure. How he cleansed it every day by chopping wood, by carrying hay to the herds, by kneeling with a bucket beside the well. His soul ought to be beyond reproach. Released from his body, his soul bellows drunkenly. Unshaven, his soul enters the dreams of sleeping widows, whispers curses into children's ears, tempts people drinking at the pub to denounce God himself. On the third day, his soul returns, groveling, dragging its dirtied, innocent shirt, crawls up to the Lord God himself, kisses his hands, and in a voice ruined by drink, begs that Kukutis be forgiven the mortal sins it committed without him knowing. Spent, Kukutis' soul returns through his eyes, gnashing its teeth, and falls into life's long sleep. Okay, I'll just read a few more. Kukutis wants to see his homeland. It's been such a long time since I've seen my homeland, working her fields, fixing her thatched roofs. Life never gave me enough time, tiring out my eyes and my thoughts. There was always something to do, somewhere to go, somewhere to drive to. I see that it doesn't even work for those people who drive fast, or for them who eat their fill so that their words about our homeland would be more beautiful. I worked and I worked, not even able to understand my own thoughts. I only wanted to earn a Sunday so that I could think. When I finish all my work on my hard-earned Sunday off, I'll lie in the grass with my hands spread freely on the ground, and then I'd like to see my homeland, which life never gave me time for. I've never earned anything more, and so I have nothing more, and so I no longer want for anything. Okay, two last poems. Coquittus has this mystical part of his existence that he dies and then he's resurrected from the dead. So throughout the book he keeps dying and coming back to life.
Very Catholic.
Yes, yes. And so I'm going to, and then actually, so I'm going to read Coquittus's Testament, and then I'm going to read a poem that really is a metaphor for what happens when small nations, small languages disappear off the face of the earth. And then one final poem about what happens when small languages and small countries, through a miracle, are resurrected and come back to life. So, Coquittus's Testament. I'll never grow used to not being. When my last day comes, tie up my hands, or better yet, chain me to my bed. I'm afraid that out of fear of dying, I might kill myself while dying. I'll never get used to not being. So that I wouldn't harm myself, tie up my hands with ropes, secure my feet with blocks. I'll thrash about like a captured ox until they cart me to the Zhivanishka cemetery. I'll never grow used to not being. I'll run away and show myself to widows. I'll loot at night like a prisoner. I'll hide my ragged self in the rye, just so that I may die further away from my death. A last farewell to Coquittus. Burrowing into the grass, small Coquittus dies, curled up like a bee beside his hive. He dies for the last time, breathing in all the good of life. Coquittus dies, so small, unseen from airplanes, undetectable on radar screens, unnoticed by submarines. Coquittus dies quietly, not interrupting radio waves, train schedules, flight schedules. Small Coquittus dies, not hurting anyone, like a sigh. So small, invisible to the entire world, he dies for all times, dies wherever there is a trace of life, a corner of sky, a handful of earth, an ant with a fir needle. He dies in birds' nests, on snow-covered mountain peaks, in fruit seeds, in grain. He dies in books, in beehives. He dies there where he can never be, in express train windows, assembly halls. He dies for words, for children, for the Antarctic, for Ararat, Australia, the Andes. He dies for the entire world. A star risen over the horizon broadcasts his eternal death to infinity. One last poem. One last poem because he died, but now he's got to rise up.
So true.
I can't leave it on this really sad note. So, let's see. Sorry, so many poems in here.
found it, and this is, the way I interpret that last poem is that really the poet was talking about what's going to happen, if Lithuania dies. No world's not going to notice. This country is just going to fade off the maps, fall off the face of the earth. But then this poem, I think, gives a lot of hope, and it's one that he read often at mass demonstrations during the years of the Singing Revolution. It's called Coquittus's Swallow's Hymn, and it's really a poem about coming back, about being reborn. And for you, spring, isn't it spring? And for you, spring, isn't it beautiful when it's beautiful, when it's spring? How beautiful it is when it's beautiful. Even for the not beautiful, it's beautiful when it's spring, when the sun thaws in the window panes. How beautiful it is to be grass or smoke over the homeland. Even for the dead, it's beautiful on earth. How beautiful it is for you, spring, when it's beautiful, when all of Lithuania returns to the fields with plows and hoes after a long winter's exile.